the Pike County carnage. The case involving the crime against 8 members of the Rodens family became one of the most notorious and complex in Ohio. Overnight, the motto, "all for one and one for all," became fatal for each family member. Only the minor children were spared from the mass violence. The investigation spanned over 10 states in the USA. Detectives conducted more than 600 interviews, gathering around 700 witness statements. Various theories were considered: self-harm, retaliation by illegal substance dealers, and cult sacrifices. Attorney General Mike DeWine even suspected local residents of withholding crucial information. It seemed the investigation had hit a dead end. Until a moment came, when a solution, lying on the surface, became apparent. As it turns out, the most complex situations are often rooted in simplicity. This story illustrates how familial bonds turned into a bloodbath. In Pike County, Ohio, USA, it all began with a simple crush. Hannah Mae Roden was 13 years old when she met 18-year-old Edward Jake Wagner. The young man invited her to the prom. From that evening on, they were inseparable. Their relationship elicited mixed feelings. Undoubtedly, the love that blossomed between them was visible to the naked eye. On the other hand, the age difference raised many questions and doubts. However, the young couple's parents did not obstruct their relationship. After all, everyone had been young once. Over time, the Roden and Wagner families started spending weekends and parties together. Love was passionate and carefree. When Hannah turned 15, she announced her pregnancy. Upon hearing the news, Jake was overjoyed. He anticipated how delighted his family would be with the new addition. The Wagners highly valued traditions and lineage, hence adored children. In them, they saw the continuation of their lineage. Even ancestral names were passed down from generation to generation. Jake's father was named George Wagner III, and his brother, George Wagner IV. The Rodens, on the other hand, had a simpler, less ostentatious approach to children, but this did not diminish their family values. Christopher and Dana Roden, Hannah's parents, remained very close and united even after their divorce. They loved their 3 children and dedicated their lives to their well-being. Unlike the Wagners, the Roden family had a modest income. 40-year-old Christopher worked as a handyman at the Big Bear Lake family complex, while 37-year-old Dana was a nurse's aide at a youth rehabilitation center. Nevertheless, they managed to instill humanity and diligence in Christopher Jr., Hannah, and Clarence, Frankie. Everyone was thrilled about the arrival of little Sophie. To celebrate her birthday, a grand party was organized. Soon after, Jake suggested that Hannah move in with him and his family, arguing that it would make life more comfortable for both of them, a point hard to contest when living in a trailer. His logic seemed sound, but Hannah declined. By that time, she had come to understand her partner better and saw the invitation as an attempt to limit her independence. Moreover, the once caring and attentive young man had become suspicious and aggressive. Jake had resorted to physical aggression on several occasions. His rough behavior cooled Hannah's feelings for him. Her refusal became a bone of contention for the Wagners. Now, each of Sophie's parents was determined to gain full custody of the girl. The families began to advocate for their own interests. Driven by his desire, Jake went as far as to threaten his beloved, angry that she refused to sign a document transferring custody rights to him and his brother. In a fit of anger, he once messaged her, saying that if necessary, he would take the daughter by force. "If you truly loved her, you wouldn't resist. You would have long ago handed her over to be raised in a healthy environment," he claimed. For some reason, he believed the Rodens posed a danger to Sophie. Such conversations continued for 2 years, during which Jake became more tyrannical. Hannah grew tired of the total control and in March 2015 completely ended the relationship. Moreover, she had come to know something alarming. It turned out that Jake's brother, George IV, had gained custody of a son by threatening the boy's mother with a weapon. This confirmed that the Wagners saw moral and physical coercion as acceptable means. To protect herself and her daughter from this unscrupulous family, the young Roden decided to distance herself. She wanted to raise her daughter alone while working as a nurse's assistant and finishing school. The situation worsened when everyone learned about Hannah's second pregnancy. Although she claimed the child was from another man, Jake had his doubts. He attempted to find out if she was seeing someone else. So, in December 2015, he hacked into her social media accounts but found nothing incriminating. At the end of his search, he noticed that the woman was communicating with George IV's former mother-in-law, which sparked genuine interest. A court case was soon to follow, during which the Wagner family repeatedly interacted with the woman. "They'll have to eliminate me before they can take custody of my daughter," Hannah wrote in her message. Jake shared the details of the correspondence with his family, infuriating them. Then his maternal grandmother, 65-year-old Rita Newcomb, forged an important document regarding custody. Moreover, during a court session to determine the granddaughter's residence, Christopher Roden and George Wagner III had a serious disagreement. Ultimately, the relationship between the families completely deteriorated. Soon, a terrible idea occurred to the Wagner family. Hannah was so uncooperative that they felt the need to eliminate her, as well as the entire Roden family, who could claim custody of Sophie. This insane thought turned into a monstrous plan that solidified by Christmas 2016. People's thoughts during the festive season are usually focused on love and creation, which cannot be said for the Wagner couple, who organized a vote. It was decided whether they would implement their plan. All family members agreed. The only thing left was to assign roles and prepare. 5 months were spent studying the Roden homes and surveillance cameras, with special attention to their daily routines and work schedules. Each person in the criminal plot was responsible for something. For instance, Angela Wagner bought sneakers for all family members to wear at a predetermined time. To prevent the victims from seeking help, she acquired a special device to block communication, planning to secretly install it on the Rodens' phones. To minimize noise, George III suggested making homemade silencers. He also took care of the transportation on the night of the crime, aiming to secure a van that would not draw attention. Sophie was to stay safe at home with Angela, as the court had granted Hannah and Jake joint custody. The Wagners chose a time when it was their turn to look after the girl, meticulously planning every detail for a flawless execution. On the night of April 21, 2016, George Wagner III decided to visit Christopher Roden, allegedly to offer him a job opportunity that could improve his financial situation. The job offer was merely a pretext to gain entry into the house. Unsuspectingly, Roden Sr. opened the door. On the morning of April 22, 2016, at about 8 p.m., Bobby Jo Manley, Dana Roden's sister, entered Christopher's trailer. She did this daily since the day he had offered her a job. Bobby took care of the animals belonging to the Roden family. She noticed someone was inside, which was unusual for that time when everyone typically went about their business. Inside the trailer, in a pool of blood, lay Christopher and 38-year-old Gary, his cousin. The men lived together. In horror, she grabbed the phone and dialed emergency services, reporting what she had seen and requesting assistance at 4077 Union Hill Road. Shocked, Bobby proceeded to the homes of other relatives. She knocked loudly on one of their doors. Soon, a 3-year-old boy, Clarence Roden's son, appeared. She asked him where his parents were, but the boy did not respond, only pointing towards the bed. Entering the house, she screamed at the sight of 20-year-olds Clarence and Hannah Hazel, his wife. The couple was deceased, with their 6-month-old baby stirring between them, alive but splattered with the blood of his parents. After Bobby's 911 call, the police immediately headed to the given address. As they approached the Roden property, they were stopped by a neighbor. Sensing trouble, he asked the officers to check 2 more addresses of the family members. He was right. In the 3rd trailer, police found bloodied bodies. The victims were identified as Dana, 19-year-old Hannah, and 16-year-old Christopher. The attackers spared Hannah's youngest child, a baby girl only a few days old. Later, another victim was discovered, 44-year-old Kenneth, the elder Rodens brother, who lived a 15-minute walk from the others. By 2 in the afternoon, 8 victims had been identified: Christopher, Dana, Clarence, Hannah Hazel, Christopher Jr., Hannah May, Kenneth, and Gary. The only survivors were small children: a 3-year-old, a 6-month-old baby, and a newborn just 4 days old, along with 2-year-old Sophie, who was at the Wagner's home at the time of the incident. After examining the bodies, police surmised that all of the victims had been killed in their sleep by gunshot wounds. Detectives later pieced together the events of that night. The patriarch of the family was awake when the attackers burst into the house, as evidenced by a wound on his right arm. Christopher attempted to defend himself, but was hit with 9 shots to the head, torso, and limbs. 5 bullets were removed from Dana Rodens' neck and head. The rest of the family was killed by gunshots to the head. Gary was shot 5 times. Christopher Jr. was shot 4 times. Clarence and his wife Hannah were shot 3 times each, and Hannah May was shot twice. Kenneth was the only one to be shot once. In total, the assailants fired 32 shots, some even posthumously. In addition, bruises were found on some of the bodies, indicating physical abuse. Since no one in the vicinity heard anything, investigators concluded that the perpetrators used silencers, indicating a carefully planned and executed act. It was clear that the victims were not random. Someone wanted revenge on the entire family. During the search, police found 5 Remington shell casings of different types and an unused bullet from a different model of gun. In addition, the scattered nature of the trailers indicated that more than one person had committed the crime. Leonard Manley, Dana's father, claimed, "The criminals knew the Rodens well, or the dogs would have been barking all over the Pike." The question of who dared to commit such an act kept police officers busy. The Attorney General's office provided more than $20,000 for the funeral of the Roden family. The deceased were interred in several stages. On April 28, 2016, Gary was the first of the victims to be buried in South Shore, Kentucky. He was followed by Hannah Hazel, whose farewell was held on May 1st in the village of Otway, Scioto County, Ohio. The other victims were buried on May 3rd in West Portsmouth, in the same county. Many local residents came to say goodbye to the family and pay their respects. As for the fate of the surviving children, they were placed in the care of relatives. A wave of panic swept through the neighborhood. The police urged the relatives of the Rodens to take necessary precautions and advised all residents of Pike to stay away from their homes at night. The cold-blooded mass murder outraged residents across the state, who demanded that the results of the investigation be made public and that the perpetrators be apprehended as soon as possible. Cincinnati businessman Jeff Ruby offered $25,000 for information that would help arrest and convict those involved in the murder, but he later declined the reward offer. No less than 100 individuals were part of the investigative task force working on the Roden case. Following the funerals as part of the investigation, 3 trailers belonging to the slain family were towed away. The following day, several more vehicles met the same fate, all transported to a secure facility. This was done to preserve evidence and protect the personal belongings of the deceased. After the investigation, the family's cars and farming equipment were planned to be returned to the victims' relatives. Forensic specialists joined the investigation. Trailers were meticulously examined. However, no DNA of the suspects was found in any of them. Cameras had been installed in the mobile homes, but they too provided no information as they had been disabled. Those who planned the crime had thought through every detail meticulously. It seemed there were no significant leads until detectives discovered something. Cannabis crops were found at 3 crime scenes. In one location, there were about 200 plants. Officers believed the cannabis was grown for sale, not personal use, leading to speculation about the involvement of Mexican drug traffickers. However, the amount of cannabis found was too insignificant to suggest an attack by an entire cartel. In January 2017, a close relative of the Roden family was arrested for drug trafficking, which was considered a coincidental circumstance. Leonard Manley stated that his daughter had no involvement with the cannabis operations. "They're trying to drag Dana through the mud, and I don't like it," he asserted. Some family members confirmed that Christopher and Kenneth Roden, the older brothers, grew marijuana but were unaware of any large-scale cultivation. The theory of a family feud over criminally obtained money was also debunked. Alongside the prohibited substances, specialized equipment for breeding chickens for cockfighting, as well as cages with fighting cocks, were found at the Rodens. It soon became clear that illegal cockfights were not the cause of the homicides either. Months went by without uncovering the true motive behind the crime. It reached a point where, on April 13, 2017, local authorities announced they lacked sufficient evidence to make any arrests. Nevertheless, prosecutor Rob Young stated the investigation was ongoing, suggesting they had some leads they were not yet ready to disclose. Another year passed, and the second anniversary of the mass crime received little attention, with no coverage in the local press, and neither the sheriff nor the prosecutor attending the memorial service. This led the community to believe the investigation had stalled. Unexpectedly, on May 12, 2017, a SWAT team raided a home in Pike County, 10 miles from the crime scene, initially searching for suspects, but later revealed to be gathering evidence. Detectives also searched a house in Adams County once owned by Jake Wagner, though he had sold it by then. On June 20, 2017, the investigation publicly shifted focus to the Wagner family. 26-year-old Jake, 27-year-old George III, 47-year-old George IV, and 48-year-old Angela, who lived 15 miles from the victims. The Wagners had moved to Kenai, Alaska, citing difficulties staying in the area. They claimed to have loved the Roden family, stating their deaths caused them immense suffering. Rob Young's words from a year earlier proved true, as the investigation had made a breakthrough and was now seeking information from the public on the Wagners' discussions about firearms, ammunition, vehicles, etc. 2 years prior. It wasn't long before the suspects, running low on funds, returned to Ohio, where detectives had gathered enough evidence for arrests, including proving Jake had hacked into Hannah's account. During the examination of the Wagner family's devices, search queries related to guardianship were discovered. It was also found that Angela had purchased sneakers for the entire family just a few weeks before the crime. The tread pattern of one of these matched that found in one of the trailers. Officers believed Angela was the mastermind behind the horrific scheme, with Jake as the primary executor. According to the investigation, each family member was involved in the criminal act. On November 13, 2018, the Attorney General announced the arrest of the Wagner couple, as well as their sons. They were charged with planning and carrying out the termination of life. Rita Newcomb, Angela's 65-year-old mother, and Frederica Wagner, George III's mother, were also arrested. They faced charges of perjury and obstructing justice. In 2019, Rita Newcomb underwent handwriting analysis, which proved her involvement in forging a guardianship document for Sophie. Later, to avoid imprisonment, she struck a plea deal. The charges against Frederica Wagner were dropped in June 2019. The other Wagners remained incarcerated, having refused to cooperate with the investigation. They denied any involvement in the deaths of the Rodens and expressed sorrow over their passing, wishing for the real perpetrators to be caught. However, on April 22, 2021, 5 years after the tragic incident, Jake decided to make a deal with the prosecution. The agreement was that he would disclose details of the crime in exchange for all family members receiving life sentences instead of the death penalty. Wagner Jr. admitted to taking the lives of 5 out of 8 individuals. Thus, he pleaded guilty to 23 criminal charges, including 8 counts of aggravated crime. The remaining charges included burglary, conspiracy, illegal possession of dangerous ammunition, forgery of evidence and documents, interception of telegrams and oral messages, unauthorized use of property, obstruction of justice, involvement in corrupt activities, and unlawful intimate conduct with a young woman. He indicated that eliminating the mother was seen as the only way to secure custody of his daughter. By taking Hannah's life, He felt compelled to do the same to the other Rodens, fearing they would seek vengeance and refuse to relinquish the girl. The next to stand trial was Angela. On September 10th, she pled guilty to conspiracy to commit aggravated crime, robbery, and evidence tampering. She also agreed to testify against the other defendants. In exchange, the charge of ending a life was dropped. Angela was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The trial of George Wagner IV began on August 28, 2022. The man denied any involvement in the crimes, insisting he was completely unaware. Conversely, the prosecution argued his participation in planning, executing, and concealing the crimes. Ultimately, George IV was found guilty on 22 counts and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The trial for George III is scheduled for February 2024. Despite his entire family being convicted, he continues to claim innocence, likely facing the same fate as his older son. This once harmonious relationship ended in tragedy. The collective madness of the Wagners is beyond understanding and forgiveness. Their actions left 3 children orphaned. What will become of Sophie when she grows up and realizes what happened? In their fight for custody and a facade of well-being, the Wagners deprived the young girl of loving parents, relatives, and a peaceful life. The Amato family case, when obsession turns a quiet individual into a monster. Like many serious addictions, which can be likened to severe illnesses with psychological, biological, or social underpinnings, this case involves a destructive habit. Whether it's an urge for alcohol, prohibited substances, or gambling, or an obsessive need for a particular activity or interaction with a certain person or group. It's tragic when addiction affects not just the individual, but also their loved ones who strive earnestly to help. The once prosperous and happy Amato family faced such a dilemma head-on. As all family members were healthcare professionals, they believed they could handle the situation without external help. By the time they realized the severity of the situation, it was regrettably too late. This isn't a story of mere addiction, but of a young man's extreme obsession with a woman he had never personally met. Compounded by his addiction to forbidden substances and a pathological inclination towards theft, the situation spiraled into a horrifying outcome. Let's delve into this case to understand if there was a chance to alter the course of events and prevent the tragedy. The family home bloodshed. On January 25, 2019, a concerned man contacted the Seminole County Police in Florida. He reported that his close friend and colleague, Cody Amato, a nurse, unexpectedly didn't show up for his shift at the hospital, which was highly unusual for him. The day before, Cody had left work about 15 minutes early due to some urgent family issues at home, departing so hastily he even forgot to collect his pay for the day. Attempts to reach the 31-year-old Cody by phone were unsuccessful. He simply wasn't answering. His girlfriend, with whom he had been living recently, stated that Cody went to his parents' house the previous day at his father's request, but never returned to her place, and she too couldn't reach him. All these signs triggered alarming thoughts, prompting the dispatch of police officers to the provided address. The Amato family home, located in a suburb of Orlando, boasted a large adjoining area with a stable and a horse-walking area. Cody's car was parked in the driveway, and lights were on in several rooms of the house. At first glance, everything seemed normal. No signs of forced entry or struggle, with the doors and windows intact. When the sheriff's deputy knocked, there was no response, and calls to the landline also went unanswered. The police then sought permission to enter, and upon approval, cautiously unlocked the back door using a knife to slide the bolt. Inside, an eerie silence pervaded, though the lit room suggested someone must be present. Indeed, the homeowners were there. The officers first discovered the lifeless body of 59-year-old family patriarch, Chad Amato, lying on the kitchen floor in a pool of his own blood, with 2 close-range gunshot wounds to his chest. Next, at the staircase opposite the main entrance, lay Cody, curled up and also deceased in a massive pool of blood. Lastly, they found 61-year-old Margaret Amato sitting at her computer in the home office. At first glance, she seemed to be napping with her head resting on her arm, if not for the blood splatters on the monitor and a large, spreading stain beneath her head. The murder weapon, an IY Jericho 941 pistol found next to Cody's body, was later determined by forensic experts to have his fingerprints. With no signs of break-in or external presence and nothing missing from the house, it initially appeared that Cody, possibly after a family dispute, had ended their lives and then shot himself in the chest. However, smeared blood on the front door indicated it was locked by someone leaving the house after the incident, suggesting the perpetrator wasn't among the deceased family members. Regarding the likely suspect, there were little doubts. Those familiar or connected with the Amato family pointed to their youngest son, 30-year-old Grant, who had been missing since that evening. His car, a white Honda, along with some personal items including a laptop from Grant's room, were gone, implying that the owner had taken them. Grant was declared a person of interest and a search was initiated for his whereabouts. What's known about the Amato family? Margaret Ann Amato, née Wade, and Chad Robert Amato tied the knot in the mid-1980s. Margaret, 2 years senior to Chad, was already raising a 3-year-old son, Jason, from a previous marriage. Chad wasn't deterred by her having a child. Instead, he was ready to raise Jason as his own. In 1988, the couple welcomed their first child together, a son named Cody, followed by the birth of their youngest son, Grant Tiernan Amato, on May 20th, 1989. From childhood, the brothers shared a close bond. Raised in a well-off family, they hardly ever faced denials. However, to earn certain privileges, they had to adhere to family rules, excel in school, help with household chores, and exhibit good behavior. They strived to be the pride and support of their parents. Both parents held advanced degrees in healthcare. Margaret was a senior operational manager in a prestigious private clinic, while Chad, initially a clinical pharmacist, later shifted to software specialization. The family was quite affluent, living in a spacious suburban home with their own stable, breeding thoroughbred racehorses as a hobby. After finishing high school at 18, Jason left home, pursued university education, and started his own life. He got married, settled a family, and moved to another state, maintaining a close relationship with his parents and younger brothers. Cody and Grant were almost inseparable, attending the same school, joining the same sports team, and regularly visiting the shooting range with their father on weekends. The Amatos had an impressive firearm collection, including rare pieces, accessible only to the family patriarch for safety reasons. The youngest son, Grant, was the youngest of 3 sons in the family, and as often happens, he received the lion's share of everyone's attention and adoration. As a child, he was frail and sickly, so everyone tried to surround him with love and care. He grew up to be a modest and very shy boy, finding it hard to connect with peers, making his brothers his only friends. Grant became particularly close to Cody after their eldest brother, Jason, grew up and left home. After high school, the brothers pursued medical degrees together, eventually becoming anesthesiologists. While Cody excelled in his studies, becoming the top student in his class, Grant barely made it through with low grades. Nevertheless, both managed to land jobs in their field at a hospital. Cody earned a reputation as a reliable professional, but Grant frequently got into trouble, making errors and needing his work double-checked. In the summer of 2018, Grant's career at the hospital ended scandalously. He was caught stealing strictly controlled sedatives, which caused euphoria and hallucinations, and were used rarely for anesthesia. The discovery led to police involvement, and Grant was arrested. During interrogation, he admitted to the theft, claiming he administered the drugs to patients who, in his opinion, were undermedicated. Many believed Grant was using or selling the drugs illegally, though there was no direct evidence. He was immediately suspended and later fired. His criminal case for theft was eventually dismissed, reportedly due to his parents' intervention. Unemployed and internet-dependent. After losing his job, the 29-year-old man, already a loner, became even more withdrawn. He spent weeks indoors, glued to his computer, mostly browsing adult websites. Grant never had a girlfriend and struggled with social interactions with women, leaving him feeling inadequate. He indulged in viewing adult content and frequently interacted with webcam models on specialized platforms, trying to fill the void of a non-existent personal life. This private interaction, of course, came at a cost. Grant easily accessed funds from his parents' and older brother's accounts for these activities. This obsession quickly spiraled into an addiction, compounded by regular alcohol consumption. But Grant seemed content with this lifestyle, living off his family, spending their money without contributing anything in return. Eventually, his father issued an ultimatum: find a job soon, or he'd have to leave home and lose any financial support from the family. Grant promised his father to resolve the issue but had no real intention of seeking employment. He claimed he would become a streamer, earning by broadcasting video games. His parents, seeing this as better than nothing, agreed to set up a streaming station for him. Once everything was in place, Grant pretended to be streaming, asking for privacy, but in reality he was locked in his room, indulging in his favorite pastime, visiting adult-only websites. Trip to Japan. In August 2018, when Cody took a vacation from work, he decided to embark on a journey across the globe for a change of scenery. Dreaming of visiting Japan, he invited his younger brother Grant and his best friend Jeremy. While Cody and Jeremy had their own funds for the trip, earned independently, Grant's vacation was financed by their parents. However, rather than giving the money directly to Grant, they entrusted it to Cody, the more responsible of the two. The trip lasted nearly 2 weeks, and throughout it, Grant seemed disengaged. He showed little interest in tours or landmarks, constantly fixated on his smartphone's screen. He often stayed back at the hotel, using his brother's laptop. On a day the group went to Lake Kawaguchi near Mount Fuji, Jeremy accidentally left his credit card in their hotel room. Seizing the opportunity, Grant hacked into Jeremy's account and withdrew thousands of dollars, spending it all on private sessions with his favorite webcam model. Jeremy discovered the theft later, but initially suspected fraud. He couldn't pinpoint the culprit and continued to investigate the incident after returning home, unaware that Grant was responsible. Sylvia Venceslavova, Sylvie. Now let's delve into the most intriguing part, the identity of the mysterious webcam model who became an obsession for Grant. On a site where Grant paid for private online interactions with various women, he met the stunning Sylvia Venceslavova from Bulgaria, known as Sylvie. She captivated him with her striking looks, confidence, charisma, and passion. Sylvie made Grant feel special, loved, desired, and unique. He began to believe that her feelings for him were genuine, and they could have a real relationship. Grant was convinced they were in a relationship, and he needed to win over this fiery brunette from all her other admirers. He spent hours and thousands of dollars daily to ensure she had no time for other men. Grant also showered her with gifts like expensive lingerie and jewelry, which she would wear during their video chats. Desperate to impress Sylvie, Grant constantly fabricated stories, losing touch with reality. He claimed to live alone in a large house, own a successful business, and could afford to lavish her with money. He backed up his claims with money transfers, initially sending a couple of $1,000s, then $10,000 and even $100,000 as a birthday gift. Naturally, Grant's lavish spending didn't go unnoticed by his parents, as he was using their accounts. At first, he explained it as investments in his own online project to attract an audience, but Chad and Margaret quickly realized their son was lying. Scandal, escape, and rehab clinic. A serious family dispute erupted at home. The patriarch demanded that the youngest son immediately pack his things and leave, but his mother and Cody intervened on Grant's behalf. The family understood that Grant was suffering from severe internet addiction. However, they were baffled about how he had spent nearly $200,000 from their accounts. A thorough search in his room uncovered vials of potent substances. Grant explained he used them to keep from going insane. The parents announced they would cut off his access to their accounts and intended to send him for mandatory treatment for drug and internet addiction. In response, Grant declared he was tired of everything and ready to end his life. He then dashed out of the house, jumped into his car, and sped away at high speed in an unknown direction. Later, it was discovered that Grant went to his aunt and uncle's house, crashed through their fence, and hit the garage wall. Aware of the turmoil in the Amato family, his relatives sympathized with him and offered him a place to stay until things settled. He readily agreed. but robbed his kind-hearted relatives the next day, stealing thousands of dollars from their accounts to pay for interactions with Sylvie. When Grant's aunt informed his parents, they asked her not to call the police, promising to resolve the situation and return the stolen money. That same day, Chad personally went to their house and took Grant, who urgently needed intervention. Chad, Margaret, and Cody realized that reasoning with him was futile, and if he left home, he would likely commit theft again. They then presented Grant with a different ultimatum. Either he would go to a rehabilitation clinic for treatment of his addictions or face jail time for theft. Reluctantly, Grant agreed to enter the clinic, where he would spend 2 months away from any temptations. He was admitted to the medical institution at the end of December 2018. The grown man's little secret. While Grant was in treatment, his parents checked his computer and discovered where their son was spending thousands of dollars daily from their family accounts. They found the profile of Sylvie, the woman who had deeply affected their son, reviewed their correspondence, and found hundreds of recordings of their intimate private online interactions that Grant treasured and often revisited. The Amatos decided to inform Sylvie that her admirer, who had showered her with money and gifts, was not a businessman, but an ordinary unemployed man with drug and internet addictions. They also pointed out that the funds Grant transferred to her were stolen, potentially subjecting him to criminal charges. However, Sylvie remained indifferent, as for her, it was just a job, and she had no intention of returning the money. The unexpected return. On January 5, 2019, just a couple of weeks into his treatment, Grant made an abrupt return home, having completed less than a quarter of the necessary rehabilitation program. He had fled the clinic, where he was noted for his complete lack of compliance. Grant tearfully vowed to turn his life around and find employment, but threatened to end his life if forced to return to the rehab center. His parents agreed, but laid down strict rules. Grant was barred from using the computer, had to follow a strict schedule, and all his earnings were closely monitored. Additionally, he was given a part-time job at a local grocery warehouse. For about 3 weeks, Grant seemed to comply, leading his parents to believe he had matured and left his addictions behind. However, everything changed on Thursday, January 24th, 2019, when Grant persuaded his mother to let him use the laptop briefly to check his email and post his resume online, hoping to find a more ambitious job than his current warehouse position. Margaret trusted her son and allowed him to use the laptop, making a fatal mistake. Naturally, Grant first tried to contact Sylvie, only to discover that his parents had already written to her, exposing the truth about him. He saw this as a betrayal. Moreover, his parents had humiliated him in front of the only woman he loved, and they had to pay for that. The brutal takedown of family. Remember the previously mentioned home gun collection? Chad had kept it in a special large safe, the key to which he trusted no one. However, Grant knew about another gun stored in his parents' bedroom, always kept loaded by his father, and it was this gun he decided to use. His mother was sitting at the computer in the home office when her youngest son quietly approached her from behind and shot her in the back of the head. The position of her body suggested she didn't even have time to turn around or understand what was happening. Next was his father, who was about to return home from work. As soon as Chad entered the kitchen, he was confronted face-to-face with Grant and immediately received 2 bullets to the chest. Grant tensely contemplated his next move, devising an even more monstrous plan. He decided to frame his own brother Cody, the only person who had always stood up for him, helped him, and been his best friend. By then, Cody had moved out of the family home and was living separately with his girlfriend. To lure Cody home, Grant used his now-deceased father's phone to send several messages asking him to come home immediately because something terrible had happened. He didn't elaborate, confident that this information would be enough to make his brother rush home from work. Grant's calculation was correct, and Cody indeed arrived, even leaving work early. Entering the house, he only made it to the bottom of the staircase leading to the second floor before being shot and collapsing. Cody didn't die instantly. He had time to realize the horror of the situation, but was powerless to change it. After eliminating his family, Grant coldly wiped his fingerprints off the pistol, placed the weapon in his brother's hand to leave his prints, and then left it next to the body, making it look as if Cody had shot their parents and then himself. The rest of the evening, the killer calmly packed his things, downloaded video files of his communications with Sylvie from the computer, and even texted the girl. Having finished his affairs, he loaded his essentials into the car and drove away. Arrest and trial. It took the police just over a day to track down and arrest Grant, who was hiding in a small roadside motel in Orange County. He wasn't surprised, more disappointed that he was found so quickly, but he vehemently denied any guilt. During his interrogation at the station, he spun unbelievable tales about his father's incredible cruelty, alleging mistreatment towards him, his mother, and brother. Grant also spoke of his father's attempts to separate him from his beloved girlfriend Sylvie, whom he claimed to share true and pure love with. Regarding the events at their family home on the evening of January 24, 2019, his account was confusing and inconsistent. He suggested that his father and brother had a fight, Cody grabbed a gun, and ended Chad's life, with Margaret being an accidental victim. Grant claimed he could only guess the chronology of these horrific events, as he wasn't a witness himself, stating he spent the night in his car with his belongings after his father kicked him out. In the morning, he said he simply drove away, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded at home. His story sounded disjointed and implausible, and the evidence indirectly pointed to him as the sole perpetrator. As a result, Grant was arrested as the primary suspect in the triple homicide of his family members. He was held on a $750,000 bond, which he was unable to post, and thus remained in custody awaiting trial. The trial commenced on July 15, 2019. Notably, almost all witnesses who testified in court spoke against Grant, including his older brother Jason, relatives, and Cody's friend Jeremy, whom Grant had stolen money from during their trip to Japan. Those who knew the defendant personally described him as prone to various addictions, a pathological thief, and a liar. The main piece of evidence against Grant was a significant bank transfer from Chad's account to his younger sons. This transaction occurred late at night when all family members were already deceased. To confirm the transaction, the defendant had used his deceased father's finger for identification. The prosecution pushed for the death penalty, while his defense argued that Grant was ill and needed treatment. The final verdict was delivered on August 12, 2019. The court found 30-year-old Grant Amato guilty of first-degree triple homicide and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. On the far reaches of the Aegean Sea, where the horizon seems endless and the water stretches all the way to the sky, the Royal Caribbean was moving. George Smith and Jennifer, a young couple who had just become husband and wife, stood on deck, feeling the wind in their hair and contemplating this majestic nature. The Aegean Sea spread out before them like a vast life full of promise and plans. Thus began their wedding journey, which became not an ordinary cruise, but a story turned into a mystery. On July 5, 2005, around 8 a.m., on Deck 7, in one of the cabins of the cruise ship Royal Caribbean, 16-year-old Emily Rausch of Chicago was preparing for a new sunny day. Outside her cabin window, Emily noticed something strange that caused her alarm. She saw something that looked like blood smeared across the canopy that served as a sort of shield for the lifeboat. Nearby, she also saw a bloodstain near the very edge of the canopy, as if someone, having been injured, had fallen there before disappearing overboard. Emily could not remain indifferent to this discovery and hastened to report the strange footprints to the staff of the liner. A host of other passengers from neighboring cabins also discovered these frightening signs. A lively and exciting discussion began on Deck 7 about what might have happened. Thus began a story that made front-page headlines in many international publications just days after a happy young couple embarked on their honeymoon Mediterranean cruise. The happiness of young people was suddenly cut short by an inexplicable, terrible event that unfolded in cabin number 9062. The versions of what happened were varied and confusing, including an accident, possible robbery, or even premeditated murder, and the investigation became a puzzle for the police. Traces and evidence collected on board pointed to multiple suspects, each hiding their own secrets. It seems that many on the liner knew far more than they were willing to say. What really happened that dark night on board? That is the question that detectives, journalists, and all those following this mysterious story are asking themselves. George Smith was a cheerful, inquisitive, and bright young man. He was born in the small town of Greenwich, Connecticut. His childhood was a happy one, filled with the joy and support of his family, which came first for George, and he always maintained a close relationship with his parents and his sister Bree. His father, George Smith Sr., owned a liquor store and ran it himself. The family business was not just a job for him, but a true passion. In 2000, the younger George Smith successfully completed his higher education in business at Babson College, which is located in Massachusetts. After graduation, he worked for several years in Boston as a computer data mining analyst. However, his heart has always belonged to the family business. After making an informed decision, George decided to return home to help his parents run the store. Under his father's guidance, he was going to learn the ins and outs of the family business so that he could take over the store in the future and allow his parents to enjoy a well-deserved vacation. In 2002, at one of his reunions with friends, George Smith met a girl who became his life partner. Jennifer was also a Connecticut native and had just received a job offer as an elementary school teacher. She was bright, beautiful, and ambitious, just like George himself. The young people were completely enamored with each other. George's parents were also delighted with his chosen one. 3 years later, in 2005, when George was 26 years old, the couple decided to get married and start a new chapter of their lives. They celebrated their wedding at the Castle Hill Inn, located in the picturesque town of Newport, Rhode Island, and the ceremony itself took place on the ocean front. It was a location perfect for such an important event in their lives. Immediately after the ceremony, the newlyweds went on a wedding trip, choosing a cruise on a luxury liner, one of the majestic ships of the Royal Caribbean. The tour, lasting 12 days, involved sailing the beautiful waters of the Aegean Sea. Their journey began in Barcelona on June 29th and included stops on France's Côte d'Azur and then along the coast of Italy. Aboard the liner, George and Jennifer quickly struck up a friendship with another couple and a young man named Askin from California. 20-year-old Josh Askin, a man with a keen sense of humor, quickly won George's friendship, and onward the merry company enjoyed spending time together. The 1st of July, when the liner moored off the Italian coast, they decided to go on land together and have fun. All day July, 04 young people traveled around the island, walked through the narrow streets of its old town, swam in the cleanest Aegean Sea, and tasted the local cuisine in cozy taverns. Happy and cheerful, they enjoyed each other and the atmosphere of this beautiful place. Mykonos left unforgettable memories in their hearts, and they planned to also have fun continuing this evening together on the deck of the liner. After a romantic dinner, George and Jennifer met up with their friends again on the liner. The merry company decided to unite and have a good laugh to remember this exotic corner of the world. The evening was full of laughter and excitement. After enjoying delicious appetizers and drinks, the newlyweds in the company of Josh Askin went to have fun in the casino on board the liner. George and Josh enjoyed sitting at the craps table. They were also kept entertained during the game, while Jennifer enjoyed playing at the poker table. By the end of the evening, the newlyweds had lost a not insignificant amount of money without regret. They joked about losing. After all, it was their honeymoon. After the casino closed, apparently, the friends decided to continue their night out. The last video of George was recorded around 2:30 a.m. on one of the liner's many security cameras. The footage showed him leaving the casino, but that did not mean George would return to his cabin. In the early morning hours of June 5, 2005, on the Greek island of Mykonos, a mysterious plot began to unfold. George Smith, 26, a newlywed who was on an Aegean cruise with his wife Jennifer, disappeared. Last night, George was reportedly having an active time enjoying the liner's atmosphere of fun and luxury. Everything seemed harmless that night, but the sequel turned out to be much darker. The captain of the ship examined the cabin, under the window of which strange footprints had been found, as well as the place on deck. There was no one in the cabin. The available footprints and evidence indicated that something serious had happened. The possible disappearance of the newlyweds was related to violence. The news quickly reached all the liner's visitors. There was alarm aboard the ship. Passengers were disturbed by the strange events. Deck 7 was cordoned off. No one was let in or out of their cabins. The ship's crew thoroughly checked every possible establishment on the liner in hopes of finding the missing George and Jennifer. After the discovery of blood, the newlyweds were presumed to have mysteriously disappeared. Taking the situation into his own hands, the senior officer headed to their stateroom to get to the bottom of what was going on. From all available traces, it was hypothesized that George might have fallen overboard the ship. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ship, the search for the young couple was still going on. By 10 a.m., Jennifer was found in the ship's spa, where she was having a pre-booked massage session. Her facial expression spoke of deep surprise and concern. She claimed to be unaware of her husband's whereabouts and that she had not seen him since the previous night. Jennifer revealed that when she woke up this morning, her husband wasn't there. At first, it did not seem unusual to her, because he had spent the night with friends and in the morning he was in another cabin, so she did not search for her husband, but went for a spa treatment without being bothered by his absence. At noon, Turkish authorities arrived on board to begin an investigation. The ship's captain reassured the anxious passengers and announced that the abnormal events required cooperation with local authorities. He emphasized that it was a measure necessary to clarify the circumstances and expressed hope that the situation would be resolved soon. The police officers began their questioning with the missing man's wife, Jennifer. Her agitated state and apparent lack of information about her husband made her the main suspect. She said that she had not seen George since the previous night, and that men in white uniforms from the Royal Caribbean had shown up at her door announcing that her husband may have fallen overboard the ship. They also noticed traces of blood on the boat's awning, after which there was no room for doubt. Something terrible had happened to George. Investigators scrutinized cabin 9062 on the cruise ship. This cabin was a mess. Perhaps it was the result of a hurried search or even a struggle. In the bathroom, small drops of blood were found on the carpet and towel, and there were fingerprints on the balcony railing. Turkish investigators also found 2 small bloodstains on the bedding, each about 2 centimeters long. These samples were identified. The blood belonged to George. All evidence indicated that George had been traumatized inside the cabin before his mysterious disappearance. The investigators' attention was particularly drawn to a chair on the balcony, which had been moved so that it was possible to sit next to the railing. They found marks on the railing as if someone had sat on it. This raised suspicion among many, including the ship's captain, that George might have fallen from the balcony. But the high railing and the presence of blood, both on the boat's awning and inside the cabin, also raised suspicion of a murder that had occurred. Investigators began reconstructing the sequence of events that night, trying to figure out who George was spending time with and what might have led to this tragedy. The investigation was just beginning, but it was already obvious that they were facing a complex and dark story, full of mysteries and unexpected twists and turns. When the Turkish authorities entered the ship to begin investigating the disappearance of George Smith, they decided to start by questioning the company of boys with whom the newlyweds had spent time the previous night. The situation remained mysterious, and every detail could be important in solving the mystery. Members of the company revealed that George and Jennifer had consumed too much alcohol that tragic night. According to them, George was intoxicated, and they helped him back to his cabin where they put him to bed, removed his shoes, and left him alone. They also reported that they could not find Jennifer and assumed that she had returned to the cabin later. However, there are a number of discrepancies in Josh Askin's testimony. Specifically, he claimed that he saw Jennifer leave with a casino employee named Lloyd. Josh believed that there was a passionate connection between the two of them, and they didn't even hide their feelings in George's presence. But video camera footage showed that at 3:30 a.m., Jennifer stumbled away, leaving George with her new friends. And Lloyd's key card data indicated that he returned to his cabin at 3:25 a.m., which was confirmed by his girlfriend, whom he woke up upon entering the cabin. These discrepancies raised further questions for investigators and led them to believe that Josh Askin may have had his own motives for hiding some important details. The investigation continued, and each new detail added more and more mystery to the story. Greg Rosenberg, a young man of 19, was enjoying a cruise on a liner with his family and friends. In this company were his cousin, Zach Rosenberg, and a close friend, Rostislav Kaufman. All three, despite their Russian roots, held American passports and lived in New York City. The fun began in the casino, where Jennifer and Greg Rosenberg decided to try their luck at poker. The mutual gambling lasted until late at night, and when the casino closed at 2:30 a.m., the group of guys decided to continue the fun together. They headed to the disco, continuing to dance and enjoy alcohol. Lloyd Botha, the casino manager, was also spotted in their company. He joined in the fun as the young men continued their nightly entertainment. Next, the events of the night, as described by the witnesses, begin to diverge as the individual members of the group begin to gradually disperse to their cabins. Already deep into the night, the boys were visibly drunk and rowdy. According to the rules of order on the ship, it was decided to block the delivery for such people who are loud and behave inappropriately. And when the staff of the liner refused to serve two drunken visitors, the young people remembered that they had with them a bottle of absinthe, purchased on a walk on the island of Mykonos. However, cruise passengers were forbidden to drink their own alcohol. At a certain point, Josh returns to his cabin, which was on the same deck, to retrieve a special bottle of absinthe that he said he had plans for. As it later turns out, the absinthe was unusually strong, with an alcohol concentration of over 70%, making it one of the strongest drinks available. George decides to help his friend and hides the bottle behind the waistband of his shorts. After 3 o'clock in the morning, when the liner was already completely quiet, an observant janitor noticed something unusual. A group of young men, including Greg, Zach, Rostislav, Josh, and George, were drinking their bottle of absinthe. This circumstance did not go unnoticed, and it became another element in the investigation. However, it wasn't just the guys who were drunk that evening. Jennifer, who had seemed relatively sober and calm at the beginning of the evening, began to change noticeably. She began to stagger and at one point even leaned on the casino manager, Lloyd. Her behavior gave different impressions to witnesses. Some thought she was trying to keep her balance, while others saw it as flirting. It also remains unclear what happened afterward between the young spouses. According to witnesses, there was a conflict between the couple. Perhaps they were just discussing the previous evening and jokingly or seriously, but at some point Jennifer hit George. It was unclear whether this happened in a playful manner or perhaps in anger. After that, Jennifer left the disco. At about 3:30 a.m., Jennifer, stumbling and visibly intoxicated, left the place of entertainment, leaving George in the company of his new friends. This moment was the turning point that night. The testimony of staff witnesses proved pivotal in uncovering the details of the incident. Jennifer, walking staggering down the hallway, attracted the attention of the janitor, who had earlier noticed the young men enjoying their absinthe. He gave her support, helped her to the elevator, and watched her turn right when she reached her deck. However, there was a strange discrepancy. Her stateroom was on the left, but she headed in the opposite direction. Jennifer was later found sleeping in the hallway, far from her room. 2 guards and a female duty officer used a wheelchair to get her back to her quarters. When they got there, the clock was already showing 4:52 a.m., but George wasn't there. The curtains on the balcony doors were drawn tightly, and they remained stationary even with the breeze. This raised questions. Was George able to go out to the balcony on his own after his new friends left him in bed? Deputy Chief of Police Chit Hyman and his wife were resting in a neighboring cabin and witnessed the unfolding events. The couple had been asleep for quite some time, but at 4 a.m. they were suddenly awakened by a noise on their floor. They first heard loud noises from stateroom number 9062, where the newlyweds were staying. Chit Hyman immediately called guest services to report the noise. He also pounded on the wall and yelled to his neighbors, which resulted in brief silence. Then there was loud talking again, lasting about 3 minutes, and suddenly there was a loud argument on the balcony. Chit and his wife heard someone say good night several times, as if trying to chase people out of the cabin. This was followed by sounds like moving furniture, and finally a loud thud resembling the falling of an object. Chit Hyman decided to check what was going on and opened the door. He saw 3 men he could not identify. Several other passengers also reported a loud noise that sounded like a body hitting the canopy of the boat, followed by a woman's scream. But none of the eyewitnesses had conclusive evidence that a woman was inside the cabin at the time. According to witnesses, 4 young men entered the cabin, but only 3 of them were visible as they exited. The question arose, could one of them have stayed inside, trying to find money from the newlyweds, which after a generous game in the casino may have wanted to steal intruders? The version about a failed robbery attempt seems the most plausible. However, there are alibis for the 3 boys, Greg, Zach, and Rostislav, who were allegedly in another stateroom just minutes after Chit Hyman saw the 3 unknown men. The keycard records for George's stateroom confirm that the boys entered it at 4:05 a.m., according to their testimony, and that they entered the cabin again was not recorded. Thus, there are several theories as to what may have happened to George Smith. Version 1. Robbery. The version of a possible robbery represents one of the main ones. By all appearances, George and Jennifer got drunk fairly quickly that night, but from witnesses' observations, they looked more or less sober when they left the casino at 2:30 in the morning. At 3:30 a.m., however, they were no longer able to return to their cabin on their own, suggesting possible exposure to illegal substances. This theory is supported by the testimony of other casino visitors who claim that George and Jennifer spoke openly about having large sums of money possibly received as wedding gifts or casino winnings. Different witnesses mentioned different amounts, but they all estimated their wealth in the tens of thousands of dollars. Of course, they could have been victims of a robbery. George wore an expensive Breitling watch, and Jennifer owned an expensive engagement ring, all of which indicated they were wealthy. Maybe their quarters were turned over looking for that money. The traces of blood on the sheet could probably have come from the kidnapper's attempt to remove George's valuable watch from his wrist. Version 2. Action of alcohol. The second version of events related to the effects of alcohol and hallucinogens. The captain, upon learning of the drunkenness of the passengers and the footprints on the balcony, concluded that there may have been an unintentional accident, and for example, during the scuffle, George fell overboard. Particular attention is paid to the question of the presence of hallucinations and their potential danger due to the ingestion of absinthe. Experts in the field of toxicology emphasize that everything depends on the concentration of the active substance, in this case, thujone. Today, this drink is available for sale in many European countries, and its concentration is significantly limited by European Union regulations. This means that in officially sold absinthe, the concentration of thujone is so low that it is not capable of causing hallucinations. However, illegally made absinthe with a much higher concentration can be found on the black market, which in theory can cause hallucinations. This seems unlikely in this case, as the absinthe the Smith couple purchased was bought officially in Europe and could not have caused such effects. According to experts, to achieve hallucinogenic effects using official absinthe would require the consumption of a huge quantity, so large that it would hardly be tolerable for the body and would most likely lead to fatal alcohol intoxication. Thus, the version about the influence of alcohol and hallucinogens in this case seems unlikely and lacks convincing evidence. The interviewing of suspected company members in the George Smith disappearance case represents an important part of the investigation. FBI agents conducted polygraph interviews with several key individuals in this story, including Jennifer and casino manager Lloyd Botha. Both passed the polygraph successfully. However, Josh Askin failed the polygraph interview. This may indicate that he had some secrets regarding George's disappearance, but it is also possible that it was the result of special interrogation tactics used to get more information from him. There was also a videotape of 3 guys, including Russians, joking about what had happened. This tape proved to be important evidence, and the FBI agents took it into consideration. One of the unidentified guys on the tape uttered the phrase, "We gave him a lesson in paragliding without a parachute." This phrase may hint at some kind of incident or joke involving George. In 2009, all 4 guys, Greg, Zach, Rostislav, and Josh Askin, were interviewed by FBI agents as witnesses as part of the investigation into the mysterious death of George Smith. Zach Rosenberg and Josh Askin refused to give direct answers and invoked the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which grants the right not to testify against oneself. Their testimony remained ambiguous, and it appears they were unwilling or unable to provide a full account of what happened. The George Smith investigation was also influenced by the testimony of Greg Rosenberg, who was among the young men who were in the company of those entertaining that night. He claimed that they ordered food to their cabin that day, which serves as a key alibi for the Russian boys. However, there are contradictions to this claim. Records in the ship's service logs do not support such orders, and the delivery service had been blocked for their cabin the day before. The staff was even instructed not to provide any service to them that night. Greg cannot say for sure which of the cabin's passengers placed the orders. When asked about the nature of the relationship between George and Jennifer, witnesses gave different answers based on their observations and recollections. Greg claimed that because of the heavy alcohol consumption, it was difficult to determine how good the relationship between the newlyweds was. He emphasized that everyone in the group was highly intoxicated. From his testimony, it was impossible to draw definite conclusions about the nature of their relationship. Josh Askin provided information that Greg left the cabin after ordering food. However, Greg denied this claim, stating that he never left. These contradictions made the investigation even more complex and required further verification and fact-finding. What was important in Greg's words was that he had no information about whether Jennifer or Lloyd Botha were involved in George's disappearance, but he insists that the event was not accidental. The young man claimed that something crazy happened that night that will be revealed to everyone sooner or later. In December 2019, Greg Rosenberg was murdered, and his death also remains unsolved. Police are looking into a possible link between his murder and the death of George Smith. The mysterious disappearance of George Smith became a real mystery that cast a shadow on his family. The situation became more and more complicated, and the behavior of the relatives after this tragedy attracted the attention of both the public and law enforcement agencies. The Smith family continued to press the authorities, demanding that the truth and justice be revealed. The case of George's disappearance was transferred from the FBI's Connecticut Regional Office to the FBI's New York office. Their persistence, and more importantly, their ability to get the public's attention through the media, yielded little results. To try to solve this dark secret, the family offered a $100,000 reward for information that could help find and punish those responsible. They also called for a boycott of the shipowner's company, which they believed was trying to cover up the incident to keep profits. The relationship between the parents and George's young wife, Jennifer, was disrupted. After the incident, a thorough review of her behavior began. Publicly, she seemed too collected, too measured. Her reticence and unwillingness to share enough information raised suspicion. She claimed to be following the instructions of FBI agents and doing only what she was told. The Smith family, in their search for justice and truth, eventually lost faith in Jennifer when she accepted an offer from the judgment company to settle the lawsuit independently for $1 million. The move seemed to them like a betrayal and an escape from further allegations against the cruise organizers. The Smith family was disappointed by the lack of transparency in the Turkish authorities' investigation and felt that Jennifer was too quick to accept the offer. They were convinced that Jennifer was hiding something and was not showing the proper interest in finding out what had happened. Jennifer herself claimed that she remembered almost nothing from that night after 2:30 a.m. and was not even aware that the liner's staff had found her in the corridor and returned her to her cabin. The Turkish investigation has not satisfied the Smith family and their belief in justice. Skeptical of the official findings, they decided to take justice into their own hands and enlisted the help of independent forensic scientist Henry Lee. Henry Lee conducted a series of studies in the cabin and on the balcony, the work of which was not included in the official investigation. These investigations would reveal key information about what had happened and could confirm one of the two main versions of events: murder or accident. According to Henry Lee, the height of the balcony makes a fall from it unproven. It could have been the result of a third party pushing George, or being in some insane state, he could have climbed up on the chair by himself and fallen. Nevertheless, the latter version raised many questions and doubts. The expert intended to conduct an experiment with a dummy to simulate a fall from the balcony, but the company owner of the liner refused this request. George's relatives claim that this decision was made to hinder their attempts to establish the truth. Henry Lee also conducted investigations in the cabin, on the balcony, and on the boat, but the results of these investigations remained unavailable to the public. At the same time, the FBI stepped in and began conducting their own investigation. Many of their findings and discoveries also remain secret. Obviously, the FBI's focus was on the 4 young men who spent the night with George, Josh Askin, and the 3 Russians, Greg, Zach Rosenberg, and Rustislav Kaufman. Their testimony was largely inconsistent with that of the other witnesses, making the situation strange and confusing. The story of George Smith's disappearance continues to be a deep mystery, shrouded in mystery and unknown circumstances. With a lengthy investigation and many theories, the Smith family and his loved ones continue to strive to find out the truth. They initially suspected Jennifer, but then were able to be convinced of her innocence and increased the payout amount of the lawsuit against the company. This amount was divided among the family, and they secured the release of the results of the investigation of the shipowner's company, including witness statements and other information. Jennifer was left with memories of her first husband and dedicated herself to charitable organizations in his memory, striving to do good. Several years later, she remarried. Despite the FBI's efforts and long investigations, they never found out what really happened or where George's body was located. Eventually, the case was closed, and the incident was ruled an accident. The FBI determined that there was not enough evidence to continue the investigation, so says the official statement of the Federal Bureau. The mystery of George Smith's disappearance remains unsolved. His family remains in search of answers as to the cause of his death. The inability to honor George's memory at his grave is agonizing for his loved ones, and they remain hopeful that sooner or later they will be able to solve the mystery and finally learn the truth.